There we go. This is the May 8th meeting of the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Committee on Housing. And I will call the roll. Eric? Here. Mary?
Here.
John?
Yeah.
Andrew? Here. Beth?
I'm here.
And then Dagan is absent. Tracy Kozak is absent, and the assistant mayor is absent as well. She's the older citizens. We had the most copious minutes I've ever seen in my life. Yes, Dick.
You and I discussed this briefly. The fact is that nobody's gonna read through those minutes in detail and determine whether everything is correct or not. So I'm gonna just make a motion that we table the minutes at this point in time till we can get them into a format that makes it workable.
How do you all feel about that?
Second.
Sure.
So maybe edit them down.
I can ask, Stephanie Secord has offered to do the minutes. I can ask her to skinny them
Okay,
if you like.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of things in there. For instance, it says that Peter called the meeting to order. And, you know, just little things like-
Phrasing people might be a little bit.
But again, if we can put them in a format that's more typical, then it'd be easy to work with.
yeah, I thought the March minutes were more concise and quite good. And I don't want to criticize Stephanie at all.
Oh, I'm not, that's not the intent. That's not the
She's
intent.
working from
Yeah.
video.
No, I want to tell her to do less.
We can make sure.
Small volume.
Did anybody have any correction?
I wasn't here, so we
Okay.
can't help you there.
I
found the minutes to be very helpful, that I wasn't here last time, so.
I just need to rattle off a couple of things that I noticed. The goal of 500 houses, I think, was stated by one of the two chairs rather than.
But it was 500 permits. It shouldn't be houses.
Yes, right. We had Ryan Pope as Portsmouth's housing navigator. Was Dover's housing navigator. And we had Soul Source, SOUL. So it was a single source with great feeling. And then in the March 13th minutes, we had both a vote in favor of keeping 195 Greenleaf Ave in the list of city properties and then 2 or 3 votes excluding it. So I'm not sure if that first vote was reported accurately. That was all, but I. Yes. Okay, so we'll ask for maybe just shorter version. We can get to summary of the discussion, vote or action. Anything else on that? Great. So our big task is Councilors Bagley and Cook have asked Peter put in the memo to you that we come up with a list of zoning barriers that prevents housing density. Peter Britz and Peter Stiff have given us a couple of ideas. They're right here in order. We can go right through. Okay.
You wanted, do, you know, I'm just kind of questioning, and again, I had a discussion with Eric earlier, you know, what was part of the Blue Ribbon Housing Committee, but basically it's guidance to keep it affordable for housing. Looking at barriers that would impact all housing, not just affordable housing, is that our charge? Or is that an additional charge we've got because a motion was made at the council level.
Can I speak to my opinion on that?
Was that?
May I?
Yes, Mayor.
Oh, please.
So I would say that it's within our realms because there are a lot of the zoning ordinances that could change or ways, like things go to the land use committee that could actually open us up for more opportunities for affordable housing. It's not just folks in like high-end developers, but if we have the opportunity to build up in places where we can't, you could get some of the multifamily housing that you see downtown in Richards Ave, but perhaps in Panaway, which would be open. So yes, but like Richards Ave was built multifamily. There's many multifamily units in Richards Ave. How it sells now is totally different, but there are other places around town where we could be better probably using the square footage on those lots to provide more housing. And so more housing is more people in homes overall. And then things also around like parking and the like as well. So I would advocate that, yes, this is within our bounds. Yeah.
Well, again, it's a question, and the fact is that, I mean, anything can impact housing, and anything can and the argument being that if we create more housing, whatever it is, it will become kind of the byproduct of it is it will probably be more affordable housing. Is that kind of the argument?
If you increase supply.
Yeah.
At some point. We won't have a 1% below vacancy rate for rentals. We won't have a scarcity of single family homes. I'll stop there and let others speak. Andrew?
That's a comment first.
Well, I just want to say I'm actually the one that put parking on the agenda, and the reason being is because we've actually had this conversation at planning board. And the chairman's brought it up several times, and I'm sort of now coming around and getting on board. That if we remove the parking requirements out of our zoning and put them into site plan, it will actually lower a lot of barriers to housing as a whole. So that would be affordable and, all housing, right? Then you can start to actually look at the area it is and the market it is to be able to look at housing versus just putting housing all in our zoning. So that was why I brought it up, because I thought it was worth having that discussion, because in my mind, housing and transportation are intricately linked, and parking is part of that.
Yeah, both of your comments, I think, are very valid individually. And what meets in the middle is the fact that we're about to start our master plan. And zoning, yes, it can create more opportunities for housing. Is it going to create more opportunities to create affordability? Not always. So what you can't control necessarily is supply and demand and economics behind it. But ultimately, yes, if we can unlock these additional parcels or additional opportunities to subdivide parcels that otherwise were restricted, yes, there are a million examples in other parts of the country where that has happened and happened beautifully. I was just not 20 minutes ago talking to a neighbor of mine who bought a parcel on Melbourne Street, and he's fully approved, so I feel like I can talk about it. But he bought the house and it had a vacant lot next to it. They amended some lot lines, and now he's building a house, and he was like, well, I don't know what I want to do with this existing house. And, he was like, well, I could renovate it extensively, add a second level, sell it for a pretty good amount, or hold on to it, rent it for a pretty moderate amount because I wouldn't have to put as much money into it. And to him, it's, reducing his overall cost of living while choosing his neighbor.
Sure.
So,
And then ideally you could build 4 units on that extra lot and have 4 different families that could come in.
Or 3, yeah.
yeah, and I think to Mary's point about affordability and whatnot, understanding which zones that we have in the city that would be most appropriate or most suitable without uprooting why I would say all of us live here or choose to live here or choose to exist in this community is really critical. And sometimes people that do live here can't make those decisions or can't understand that to the full breadth. And so maybe a consultant like we have in the master plan process can come in and really be integral in saying, hey, look, like this is what happens elsewhere. Let's model that out before we start making rapid changes.
I would just comment too, remember when we crafted our goal statement? We said 500 below market units of housing in the pipeline permit. And foster, get the exact language, a market that provides housing for all levels of income. So that was part of our original mission statement. And we've got many cases where, like Andrew's described, minimum lot sizes, our setbacks, many of those things prevent further density. And so there, now, what does the community want is another question. But if you are simply looking at, are there barriers to greater density in our zoning? Yes. John? Yeah. And,
Yeah, and I appreciate the conversation. It's got some dimension to it, but I mean, I question looking at the agenda that, it might be within our charge, but I mean, under the current conditions, and we don't know how far into the future they're gonna exist, but if we're supposed to be doing something that's gonna change zone parking for market rate housing, that is the problem. That is the issue that is causing us to meet and, look at other alternatives for affordable housing. And I think the dominance of what's taking place in this city is market rate housing and the affordability. And so I think that, each one of the categories that's been described here is going to be dealt on a project by project basis to some respect. Whether it's a neighborhood that, wants to speak up a bit more, higher density, or the location of any development and any special circumstances that the developer wants to, request. I think it'll be a project by project condition. And unless it's well announced that, the intent of any developer is to have it to be, below market rate. And I don't know if we, make these recommendations, whether we just unlock more circumstances for market rate housing, which is not gonna solve our situation.
I was just gonna ask if the Peters had any thoughts or comments from your expertise.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways to do both. You can create market rate housing and you can get regular housing, but without creating opportunities for housing, you're not gonna get more market, more affordable.
Understand.
So, there's some techniques that can be used. We can't say it has to be affordable, but some of the things that are covered in this staff memo talk about ways to increase the housing stock.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you're gonna end up with more affordable housing. If you don't increase the housing stock, you're not gonna get more affordable housing because you're not gonna get more housing. I mean, it's pretty simple.
John?
Just a quick question, and I don't understand, I've never been involved I've been involved in a lot of things, but never in a master plan. As Andrew's talking about the master plan project, is this something that's, are any of these items lend themselves more to that process than us doing it?
The reason behind this request from council was to give direction to the master planning process, to be able to actually start with things that have been identified by committees and planning boards and staff that should be looked at more intensely, because they're gonna not just want to come in here and start with, a giant blank slate. They want to come in here and actually have some direction. So if you tell them about things we've already had conversations about and things that we think might work in the city, that's helping the consultants and the whole process of creating a new master plan. So I just wanted to make sure our
No.
conversation isn't because we're asking for zoning changes or giving them specific zoning changes. We're talking about concepts that we think could help create.
Okay, no, that's wonderful, very helpful, because what I'm hearing is the fact is we're being asked to identify areas that should be looked at and worked at through that process. So we're not coming out of here, well, let me ask the question as opposed to it making a statement. Are we expected to come out of here with recommendations or more with items that should be looked at?
I look at recommendations as being anything, right? So it's not a recommendation for a specific zoning.
Okay.
It's the idea of with taking parking out of zoning actually boost, would lowering our lot size in certain districts actually create more housing. We want the master planning process to look at that, and they will do all of the input from the community because they hold many community sessions and they want to have those targeted sort of areas to kind of look at.
But again, I know that this wasn't part of the agenda process, but I appreciate this, this discussion because I wasn't sure what we were looking to do. And again, if I look at this, and again, I'll grab what's listed here is E, focus groups. I mean, the focus groups are gonna be part of the master plan process. I mean, it's really us having a focus group to talk about these things. I'm not sure if that would be beneficial. Or is that something that's gonna take place through the master plan process?
Yeah, well, we got a little different spin on it than that, and we can get to that. We were saying,
Who's we?
the Peters and I, and
Okay, all right.
Talking about pretty much this corner.
if we want developers to build something like the cottage cluster over in Dover. Tiny. We need to ask the private sector developers, what do you need from us to do that?
Okay, all right.
Got it? Yeah.
So the focus group is not a public focus group, it's more on the people who will be impacted by any of these changes.
Right, I mean,
Okay,
well, we as city officials, we don't build houses. We have to induce other people.
okay, good, thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think your statement is somewhat circular, because it is a public discussion, because everyone is impacted, the general public is impacted.
Right.
Where I would further your statement to the next line would be, yes, the people that have experience doing it or can chime in with experience in other local municipalities and locales that they've done it there and said, Dover, this is how it is done.
Yeah.
We have seen this work or not work. Beyond the word developer, you can also look at just the private landowner who, whether it's through chopping up their larger Victorian home, creating an ADU, or creating even a multifamily, so going from 2 units to 3 units or 4 units, like Mary alluded to. All of those considerations still carry a lot of subjectivity. So for example, I'm looking at this chart where 64% of the GRB would be non-conforming. When you have 64% of something, that is an overwhelming majority to say, well, what about that 64% could we manipulate in good taste and arrive at a better solution or any better outcome? My mind goes to like Washington, DC or London, where they have English basements. And that's a phenomenal use of an otherwise, lesser than space, and is absolutely a gateway to more affordable housing. Because if we have all of these similar style homes, which in 64% of the GRB, I'm guessing a lot of them are New Englanders, older Victorians, colonials, what have you. What about those housing types can we look at as similarities or commonalities and create an outcome for that one specifically? So with the idea that Portsmouth is very unique and individualized in our different streets, different neighborhoods, how do we look at each of these GRA, GRB, GRC to provide the best or most appropriate outcomes for each of those zones?
But how we could approach that is to actually say to the master planners, will you take a look at, maybe we get rid of GRA. And GRA becomes the size of GRB and GRB combines with GRC and we only have 2 versus 3, right? And will that work and get those numbers in a better percentage?
Good, thank you.
And to just really quick, dovetail, I feel like that's a pretty good bet because at the end of the day, like we are very unique in how our lots are placed. It's New England for that matter. Like everywhere in New England has very quirky layout. So even if we do combine it and we make sort of a generalized zone, you still have a lot of control when it comes to planning and zoning because of all of these individualized factors.
I mean, I think about the fact I live in the GRC and I have a huge lot for my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Huge lot compared to most people in my neighborhood, because it was newly created in 2017, right? So I see that as, I'm like, okay, we really have why do we have 3 districts? I mean, it's crazy.
Would you share your lot with another resident? Like if you could create another housing unit on your lot, would that be?
If my house was smaller, sure. My house is kind of big.
Right, so you could derive another housing unit out of your specific house.
Yeah, if, right, you could probably take room over the garage and turn that into, make
Yeah.
it dormer out it a little bit more, and you could probably make that into its own living unit.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's possible.
Well, I think that's the why are we doing this?
Okay, that's fine.
And if it's all right with you, I'm feeling the pressure of time to move on to,
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
what are we gonna do?
Mhm. Around the clock.
So, first up is, in the memo was, parking. Beth expanded. Peter, be your S1.
Right, I mean, this list was just some ideas, to report back to the council. Planning board, as Councilmember said, has been talking for a while about moving moving parking out of zoning and putting it in site plan, so there's more flexibility through that process for the planning board to waive requirements, or standards that are in the zoning currently, where people would have to go either get a conditional use permit or get a variance if there's something, with dimensional requirements that they can't meet for their development, and then they'd have to go to the zoning board. Where through the waiver process, through site plan review, the planning board has the ability to waive a standard.
For instance, tandem parking isn't considered 2 parking spaces under our ordinance. But planning board could say, all right, you've got 6 parking spots, but they're all tandem, but each one of those 2 tandem goes to one of those 3 units. So it's not a problem that they're tandem spots, right? Because so you could count them as 2 or waive the requirement because of that. So I just thought that's always an example in my head of something that really makes sense, that it might not fit what our ordinance says, but it makes sense that it works.
How many spots per single family home are required right now?
It's based on the size of the dwelling unit, so if it's less than 500 square feet, it's half a space. If it's between 500 and 750, it's 1 space, and then if it's over 750, it's 1.3. And then, if you're doing a development that has, for every 5 units, you have to have 1 guest space. So if you have a development that has,
I was thinking in the context of like our neighborhood where everyone has to park tandem anyway.
Mhm.
And I think at max, the houses there initially were about 750 square feet, 800 square feet. But it's kind of like that example of how we could get rid of some of it. I do have a question around, so it would go to, if we can't remove the parking regulations totally, it would have to become, or the parking requirements totally, it would have to move to a special discussion for each individual development. Or,
Can you clarify? Like, this is primarily.
it would have to go
for
with
most-
each
right,
development.
this is for what, so the planning board was looking at for what requires site plan review, which is if you have a development that ends up in 3 units or more, that kicks in site plan review. So 1 and 2 family would still have parking requirements. But something that has, yeah,
They'd still stay in the zone.
so for something that has to go through site plan review and has a parking requirement. Right now, if they can't meet the parking requirement, they have to seek a conditional use permit from the planning board. And the planning board can grant a conditional use permit to require less than the required parking or more than the maximum. There's a maximum.
Yeah.
Amount of parking someone can have also. And, that process is usually a parking demand analysis and there are other conditions that they have to address, and it has to go to the planning board for public hearing. For them to consider that.
It's also a separate application.
It's also a separate application.
Would it be possible if we just changed it to have parking maximums? And that, or would it be, is there a way that this could be modified so that not every instance needs to be discussed during the site plan review? Of,
Right, and look at parking, to get rid of parking minimums.
yeah. Is that possible?
But I mean, it's up for discussion. I mean, you could certainly
Because it's,
recommend back to the council to look at. And you don't have to solve everything here in this committee. You could have broad recommendations back to the council, say, hey, why don't you look at getting rid of parking minimums?
that would be my
I think that's-
suggestion.
It's better.
Because if we are moving this to encouraging a conversation, which is always great, but then it also becomes very subjective based on it's going to be a longer conversation and it's a longer, it will lengthen the process. But if we were able to move forward full swath with getting rid of parking minimums, then maybe the conversations, if there wouldn't be that hindrance to the development. And we could just have people go forth and create their 3 family units. With maybe no parking depending on where they are,
Within certain zones.
depending on where they are.
You'd have to have a zone that allowed more than 3. So that gets you into multifamily apartment.
3+ is multi-family.
I was under the impression that you would not necessarily have parking minimums in this. It would just be part of the site review process, or would you keep them?
Well, the planning board hasn't gotten that in depth right now. I think they wanted to just now port over Article 11, which is the section in the ordinance on parking. They hadn't, so I was gonna pull up the table for uses. You know, this table in our ordinance talks about the parking requirements based on use. So if you have a health club and it's, you know,
One spot.
it's one spot for 250 square feet. So if you have however many square feet, you have to have so many parking spaces.
And these are things when you get to like the downtown overlay district actually changes those parking requirements.
Right. There's no parking requirement for non-residential use in the downtown. But for residential, here's what I was talking about for residential. That table.
Yeah, I would say my very strong preference would be to change this to a discussion of getting rid of parking minimums.
In terms of a list that we're gonna develop, could we keep it on the list in 2 parts? 1, move this to site review. And 2, consider eliminating minimums.
That works for me.
Okay,
I think, you know, what we're doing, as I understand it, is, you know, outlining areas for consideration. And
Yeah, I don't think you have to definitely solve.
we don't, have to solve- and again, I think that not knowing the process as you people do, you know, there may be some areas where the suggestion that you do away with minimums creates issues that should be addressed at some point in time, and there must be a way to do that. So again, putting it as you suggested, John, I think certainly works for me.
Mary, did I overstate?
I am not, I would just support getting rid of parking minimums.
Yeah, and truthfully, I am leaning that way myself because I've seen Dover do it.
As far as I can tell, it's emerging as best practice nationwide. It's been a while since I've worked in transportation type studies, but I don't know what it's actually like on the ground, because I was just doing thought leadership, but that was where I saw things moving, but I looked to our experts to see if they felt like that would be a.
Because in the end, you want the market to choose, right? So you let the builder choose where the market is and how much parking they're gonna need in order to sell that. And that's what will then create the parking.
And it should hopefully create momentum to increase our either public transit, bike lanes, pedestrian use, and all of that.
And
I like your term thought leadership. That was good. Anecdotally, from the planning board side of things and development side of things, give you two quick examples. West End Yards came in and developed their housing and they met the parking minimum and then had to come back and request to create additional parking because their demand was much higher for parking spaces than they originally thought. Secondarily, and so that's one zone in one project, but secondarily, at my office on Bow Street, I share a parking lot with the condo building next door. And it is written in our deed that we have the parking spaces from 9 to 5 and the residences have it from 5 to 9, which works extremely well. And while that is putting a constraint on the property, it works when that type of agreement is written out and also acknowledged. Where that also exists is the Frank Jones Brew Yard and Brew House or 1945. Anyway, where CVS is and the Ginberg buildings all are, they all have shared parking through their deeds and easements as well. The more and more we can create those overlaps in like the downtown overlay or parts of the West End, I think it can work. When it doesn't work as well, based on public feedback and general sentiment is in residential zones like Councilor Moreau's neighborhood where that is highly contested and it is extremely scrutinized. And we have to be sensitive towards it because that headline in my head reads, housing committee wants to do away with parking minimums. And then you have Councilor Moreau's neighborhood coming out in droves saying like, what if we just got over this, you know? And so you're not incorrect, like the general trend to unlocking more zoning and units is reducing that parking. I think at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that our public transit enforcement or our climate alone is not as conducive to not having a car. So when we're talking about developments outside of the downtown area, it is important to at least acknowledge that there is a general demand and a strong demand for parking in some regard. To what ratio, I'm not sure. Almost every other municipality that I've done work in is a 1-to-1, one parking space to one unit. Whereas we have, I think, 1.4 to 1.5, maybe down to 1.3. So all of those types of considerations are absolutely accurate and appropriate. It's just how much do you want to refine it down so that we arrive at the best outcome.
I mean, I would argue my neighborhood, half a generation ago had public transit. And so you could take the bus directly from here all the way up to, from my neighborhood, all the way up to York Beach. And so there is precedent that that could return at some point. I think that it's neighborhood by neighborhood. I would be hesitant to let the threat of NIMBYism stop us from having this conversation.
And keep in mind that we're only talking about 3 and up, 3 units.
If we're talking about two.
Well, that's density.
But to your point about West End Yards, I think it's better that they had less parking and then realized they needed it versus building parking and not needing it, right? It was better that they had the space to put more parking if they needed it, but didn't until they actually came to that realization. I actually think that's the better direction to go in than to just, like Walmart has a sea of parking that hardly ever gets used.
100%.
Are you comfortable with where we are on this?
Yeah.
You don't?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of people that have strong feelings about parking, but there's certainly a lot of communities that are going to no parking minimums and only maximums, so they don't want to see too much parking, but the market is gonna, in a lot of cases, in most cases, the market's gonna decide and they're gonna build it if they need it, like West Side Yards.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to density. Look at Peter's just analysis there. You want to touch this?
Sure, I mean, this was just kind of a high level look at, our residential zoning districts and what the lot area requirement is versus well, how many parcels are in each district, and then how many parcels meet the requirement or exceed it or are non-conforming to the lot area requirement. It didn't look at what's actually on the ground. We do have a lot of multifamily in some of these districts. It didn't look at what we have, or what exists on these parcels. It just looked at the lot area. And so, the question is, do you want to look at combining districts, lowering the density, allowing more than, the residential, the single residence A and the single residence B are strictly single family districts. You cannot have, the most you could have would be an ADU to have a separate dwelling on a lot. Otherwise, you only allow single family on those lots. The places to live study, they talked about, some of those groups wanted to get rid of single family stuff. I think that conversation is definitely better suited to be answered through the master plan process. And we've had conversations with the consultant, and we know, we've let them know that zoning, that housing is a big issue, and they're aware of that. So we just wanted to provide, how much nonconformity is there in our existing residential districts. A lot of people, if you have a house on a lot that's not conforming and you tear down the house and build a new one, and your lot's not conforming, you have to come to the zoning board. You see that application again and again because there's so much nonconformity in these districts.
Over half is a lot.
How would changing these or maybe eliminating some of the zones create more density or more housing, let's say that way.
Right. So example, if what Councilor Rowe was saying, do we need 3 general residence districts? Should we?
I put 5,000 and a 3,500 and that's
Right.
it. Get rid of the 7,500.
Right.
Yeah, if I were to add another column to this table, I would add lot frontage, which I know goes to non-conformity. Lot frontage to me would be a pretty good critical criteria because when you're considering places like, this neighborhood over this way, over to, it's not a good one,
Well,
but
yeah, a lot in that single residence B, the requirement is 100 feet of frontage. You
Yeah.
have many dozens of lots that are only 50 feet,
Right.
50-foot frontage that were
Yeah.
subdivided a long time ago. And they're 50 by 100.
I'm
It's
thinking
a lot
like
of 50 by 100.
Yeah.
That's
It's
silly.
like, it's kind of the going thing.
Yeah, that's
Aldrich,
So-
Baxter, Ballsack,
Right.
Sunset, that area to me is like pretty suitable to adding some more units and more density, right? Or even like Dennett Street area. But just by nature of the orientation of the lots, they would never have enough frontage but they could have more depth or just, again, like the houses are situated in such a way. So lot frontage to me would be something to study and add into for a consultant to say, hey, here's how you really manipulate this property to then yield another unit.
Right.
As far as lot area is concerned, the other nonconformity is actually has nothing to do with zoning. It's really the connection to public utility. So like on my lot, I'm on 1/3 of an acre, but I have private septic. Now, if I was connected to public sewer, good chance I would subdivide my lot or at least build another type of unit. But because I have a leach field and a septic, I am restricted by that.
Yeah.
Not only by surface area of where I can build, but also the number of bedrooms. So that would be another consideration is like, do we have an infrastructure component that in the future can be looked at or incorporated, that hopefully people can have access to, like, I know on Sagamore Ave or Walker Bungalow. I'm sure that some of those people maybe could have chopped up their lots 10 years ago if they had public connection, but
They will now.
They are.
well, for a moderate cost of 12 grand.
I was just thinking of Sagamore, you know, and those are big lots. And
Shame.
What?
We're talking about the buildings that couldn't be built.
They're just all the lots on Sagamore has the size, because most of those are all on septic, because the sewer only goes down so far. That's why you see the difference in
Yeah.
lot size. The sewer has now been taken to just beyond the bridge, right? I know it doesn't go all the way down.
Right, but because it's on Sagamore,
Right.
we're seeing more subdivisions.
More subdivisions on Sagamore because they're now got connections to sewer, which they haven't had before. It was part of the EPA requirement that we add sewer to that area.
Who would thunk?
Around Sagamore Creek. I don't know why we did
Some consent.
that.
So how do we feel about recommending that be looked into in the master plan?
Absolutely.
For sure.
Sounds good.
It just as a question, because the only vehicle to increase density now would be an ADU. Is that right?
In single family neighborhoods.
And it's a-
The only by right.
GRC, GRA, GRB actually allow sometimes duplexes. I can't remember what the amount of units, but you are
So
in some of
relieving,
those allowed more units.
so relieving this recommendation would relieve a particular lot size to acquire, for consideration for
Subdivision.
some type of density issue. But I mean, the vehicle right now currently exists as an ADU, and what's the demand in the city? Has the city been receiving on ADUs?
We've seen quite a bit since the initial regulations were adopted in 2017.
17.
And then the planning board revised the ADU ordinance.
I like to think land use did that.
Well, they did. Then,
Council ultimately.
yeah. So
I'll live it.
the ADU regulations were revised and now, so
Council
now
now and land use.
2023 was like,
it's joint effort.
it was a joint effort, but 2023 was when we finally finished that.
But we have seen an uptick in applications for ADUs. I mean, almost kind of monthly.
I know, I asked the numbers shortly after we made that change because I was curious and it was probably 40 to 50% more applications coming in.
That substantiates this, recommendation. Because that's the only vehicle. you can use.
The list of the ADUs here, just to specifically answer that question.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay, I guess.
Try to get them up.
Right, if you look at, we had this ready a couple meetings ago, but the second page shows the jump in ADU submissions since 2023. So
I feel like that's like a real change moment.
that's a win.
It's a huge win.
And. You know. a lot
18
of
for
those-
4, that's like
Yeah.
quadruple, I don't even know what the percentage is, 500%. Somebody tell me, I'm excited.
It's great.
But the other way to take.
What is the workforce component of the chart? Fine.
That's just the number of workforce housing units we've approved.
All right, so.
There's no correlation between the two.
Correlation to
There's no
the.
correlation between the two.
Yeah, it can,
I mean, the graph is somewhat similar, so. I
Yes, sir.
2019 has a big spike because that was, I think, when the Ruth Lauren Griffin building and West End Yards both got approved, so that would account for those units. 2021, I'm not entirely sure, I don't remember those.
Nope.
But then I think we've had several since 2023 that have gotten approved as well, so
Sage.
Sage, yeah, Cinemagic.
okay.
Cinemagic is now Sage.
Can you help me a little bit?
Yep.
Pending and approved, that makes sense. Under construction makes sense. Completed.
And
Built.
total,
If they, how can something be completed if, oh, these aren't, oh, these
It's in
new
place.
dwelling units, these are not,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
We'll get more into this
Means
later.
CO.
Okay, thank you.
And these are all approved. This is none.
well, on the top, they show what they are.
Oh, and they.
Yeah. pending. Because pending means it doesn't have full approval yet, right? It means they may have gone through a board, but they don't actually have a building, permit. Thank you. I couldn't come up with the word permit. Approved means they've got their building permit, but they might not have started construction
And they might never.
and they might never,
And
or they
complete-
might actually
They didn't
build.
meet, they have a CO, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, how does 2019 correlate with approved and completed? That this, just give me,
Two different things.
okay,
Yeah, so 2019, yeah, there were several things that got approved in 2019 that are now completed and now mostly sold. So we're talking West End Yards, Carson Woods,
Right.
and
Was that
Juniper.
Bartlett or was that the next year? Juniper, no.
The 105 Bartlett was 2020.
Right.
So
I remember because I recused on all that. It was during
It
COVID.
might have.
I could go in like.
Going on the bypass across from.
Oh, that's Middle Hill. Middle Hill and the Westerly was right after
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah. Those two.
I recently looked at all these numbers and was like, oh, I know what those projects. It's all coming back to me.
Okay,
So we did add a lot, because and this might be an interesting stat to you, it was an interesting to me, and looking at all these numbers. In 2019, we issued 47 building permits, but had a huge amount of units actually be permitted. And those numbers, of course, crashed during COVID. But in 2024, we actually got back up to 37 permits, but it was like 100 or so. It was like such a fraction of the actual amount of units. So
yeah.
that was a little sad.
You
I'm like,
also,
the permits are going up, so I feel like there's gotta be more units.
right.
You also have
Sometimes-
density.
Yeah, if you guys are. Move on
I'm trying to
to
help you, John.
Yeah, map changes.
map changes?
Can I add one last thing on density?
Yes.
When you eliminate single family zoning, you inherently open up a certain area or node to assemblage. And assemblage would just be a collection of a handful of properties and then merging them, right? And where you can see that has happened, I, personally speaking, in favor is Munjoy Hill in Portland, Maine, which is legitimately on a hill. And so with geography and sort of the undulations, a lot of their multifamily, 3 units, 4 units, 5, up to like 10-unit buildings are more subdued than they sound because of the geography of it. So if you have a 6-unit apartment building or condo building directly next to a single family house, it's not as abrasive as it may sound. But obviously those take into account sort of the topography or geography of it. So if we're talking about doing that in Portsmouth, the rest of the zoning has to take into account what is around these neighborhoods, because then you have to assume if someone buys 3 or 4 lots and merges them, is it something that we want a 6-unit building on? Or is it something that a 6-unit building on would be appropriate for? And I know there are probably 11 different factors or influences to that as well, but you still have to consider it. And we've seen that happen like West End Yards. West End Yards was an assemblage of 3 or 4 different properties at the time. And that's what we got, right? So sure, that's a very grand example, but on a smaller single family example, if someone buys up some of these lots, now they're building much greater size properties.
You know, if you loosen this up, one thing that a lot of cities are doing is they're producing templates of what would look good in the neighborhood, like in your neighborhood, Mary. What's a double look like that's consistent with the look and feel of family?
You mean a duplex?
Yeah, a duplex. And they have, you know, a book of examples. So it's looser zoning combined with sort of a form-based way to make neighborhoods arrive at a comfortable level at it.
It's an HDC, expanded HDC.
Yeah, design review.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Design review is
Yeah.
probably something we can add into this entire list.
but also, talking about getting rid of single family zoning, it might not be opening it up to allow 6 units. It might just be allowing 2 family in a single family zone.
Could we add that then to the recommendation, recommend looking at combining districts and eliminating single family? That, is that my understanding of what the single residents are? That's single.
Yeah, our SRA and our SRB are the single family only.
Single
zones.
residence.
Single residence.
And currently, right now, the only way to get second dwelling is through an ADU.
So, okay, so looking at combining all, and removing single residents, or was that inclusive of your?
No,
earlier
that's
statement, John?
what we're talking about.
It would be separate from what was actually there.
Yes.
Yeah, and one way to do it, which wouldn't be wouldn't be doing away with single family zoning, would be to reduce this lot area requirement. So people can subdivide their single family lot and create more housing
And you probably
In that
wouldn't
district.
include frontage, but review,
Yeah.
do a deeper dive on
on front.
the front and lot area.
I mean, considering more than 50% of those are non-conforming in single-family districts already.
Yeah.
How does everybody feel about what Mary's saying?
I think it should be looked at in the master plan process. And find out whether or not the community is behind it or not.
Yeah, addressing, single resident SR, and doing away with that. People frankly buy houses based on, what they feel is important to them. And if you buy in a particular neighborhood because you like single family houses, that's your expectation. And
You don't own
changing,
your view.
what's that?
You don't own your view. You own.
I didn't say that, what, you don't own your view. But what I'm saying is that you're going to be hearing from people who say, changing,
Why not?
oh yeah, we,
I know there's going to be an outcry against it, but that doesn't mean we can't have the
no,
conversation.
you can have the conversation, right?
And I think we need
And I-
to, because maybe there's more people out there that think that's a good idea than we actually know.
Could be.
I doubt it, but
I know it too.
Well, I guess I've heard the uproars before.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Leary, I tend to agree with you, but I also tend to agree with Mary as well, because
You tend to be quite a politician.
Maybe he's gonna run this.
I'm gonna see myself out.
one.
I think what you're describing is comfort and what she's describing is adoption.
Yeah.
And this is an iterative process. It's not like, hey, let's just go ahead and eliminate the single family zone. To me, it's iterations of where do we want this to lead to? And if you want it to lead to elimination of the single family zone, you have to reach that far.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a master plan, you get to do that and the consultant gets to speak about it. And sure, if the public wants to come out and say, absolutely not, no way, perfect, because that is more in process than somebody saying, sounds great, let's do it. Like, to me, that's way more contribution.
Now we say, sounds great, ask the question.
So,
The more it's the discussion, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, and if the public has any sensitivity to this, then they'll show up, but I don't think, we want to open things up to change the dimension and the character of some of the neighborhoods that we know exist.
on the
I'd
other
like to
hand,
see it allowing 2 family,
And I think how you present it, sorry.
and on the other hand, if you've got 2 or 3 of our zones, single family zones, that somebody drew little boxes and said, these are the frontage requirements and these are the lot size requirements, and none of the houses. comply. So you start with something that's broken.
You start with something's broken, that's Atlantic Heights. It's one of the few places in the entire state that I'm aware of. I get questions about this all the time because I'm a enforcement person. Why does the city allow connected buildings to actually sell as separate single-family homes? But we do. The lot line goes right down through the center wall of that house. And you each own a separate individual house.
Were written, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, and it's not allowed, I don't know, I work all through the state and I've never seen it anywhere else. that that's allowed.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's also in GRB.
What was it? Atlantic what?
Isn't it GRC?
Atlantic.
No, but I mean, the company that they built those was, yeah,
It was built for a shipbuilder.
yeah.
It was all ship.
Yeah,
um,
The Shattuck shipyard.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a private company that built all that housing for their employees.
the employees, yeah.
Last call for density.
Moving on.
Okay. Map changes.
So yes, the map, the land use committee looked at the gateway, kind of in two batches. One with parcels that they could move forward, to recommend changing the zoning, and then there was, or the remainder of the list, needed further discussion. Some of these parcels now have been included in the Gateway Neighborhood Overlay, the GNOD. That's why they're struck on this. Table.
Basically, we took one giant list and turned it into green light. Yep, everyone's on board. These should move forward and these need more discussion. And this is the remainder of the discussion.
I think that, number
Bad news.
46 should be stricken as well. I probably.
Oh, yeah. probably.
Constitution Ave.
No, Commerce.
Commerce.
Oh, Commerce.
There's a vacant land.
What's 000 up? Yeah.
I think that one's.
So what are you looking for? I mean, I,
So the other question or the conversation on this is looking at, some of these zoning districts that are just kind of have a residual, like, OR, office research.
Mhm.
We have a little bit of general business left over and business.
Oddly enough. So it's, do we get rid of all business districts and turn them into mixed use districts? So that there's more flexibility. You could do housing, you can do office, you can do maybe light industrial. If you look at and this was the comparison of the conversation we had back then, was G1 and G2 really do allow some light industrial. So are there really reasons? I don't see any reason to have office research anymore. I mean, it's a restricted district that you can find barely anything to build in. And that was why I started this process of, let's look at, we're gonna create more housing if we create more mixed use.
yeah.
Here's the
And so
classic.
that's the.
And, if what you're looking for is, our thought, should this go forward? The answer obviously is yes. I mean,
Here's the-
Yeah. I think as part of the master plan process, we need to look at all of those strictly business districts and see whether or not they should be mixed use. That's the way I look at it.
and I concur.
The classic example of this
It's shocking.
is service credit.
Right then.
Service credit union says, our workers don't have any housing.
Yeah.
We need housing. Well, they're in an office research zone.
Yeah.
But thanks to the land use committee changing that.
Actually, it was garden apartment, mobile home, just to be straight. That wasn't office research.
Yeah.
But they couldn't do mixed use on it. They could only do apartments.
Right.
And they wanted to put childcare and other things on that with the development of their building.
So they get gateway, which allows mixed use. And they've got an office building, childcare, housing.
And more density. You get more density with Gateway as well.
So, that's just a great example of where the greater flexibility. And wasn't that the business tree shops?
They were in
I mean,
the,
that's Gateway, sorry. that's
it was
Gateway.
already Gateway.
Yep, that didn't get changed.
And
Yeah, I mean, Service Credit Union is the recent example, but I think you can expand it out from the Westerly, which used to be the church, and across from formerly Wingett's pawn shop, like the condos at the Cates. They-
Oh,
And
yeah,
the
yeah,
street
okay.
very
On
little.
last-
Community
so take-
campuses.
So
Yeah.
I'm starting there at the Westerly where they did 2 straight line buildings, and I'm going all the way down past Jitto's to where the Greens just finished their townhomes. In that corridor alone, you had an existing Patriots Park, existing Cedars, and now the intermingling of industrial and residential or multifamily for that matter, is, I think, pretty blended and nice. So where I'm going with this is the note on the bottom of this chart says, should all of Heritage Ave be something other than industrial?
That was me. I wrote that.
And I'm in agreement, like, I'm in a resounding agreement because,
Concur.
yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, at that time, it was too big of a leap for a lot of people.
No, and I will.
I think we're ready now.
To further that example, when my first job out of college, when I was doing the leasing and management of the Viridian, which is behind McKinnon's, the first statement out of everyone from Portsmouth Mouse was A, why are there apartments here? And B, why do I want to live on Constitution Avenue? So having an address of 70 Constitution Avenue is crazy to some people, but to others, it makes total sense. It was convenient. It's
Oh, yeah.
great access. So as we look at this, the top four addresses are Heritage Ave and Constitution Ave. And to me, even if you change it, you're still going to be reacting to whatever the market is supporting. So recently handling a site in Portsmouth, and I'll be intentionally vague, but recently handling a site in Portsmouth that could be industrial or it could be residential by zoning. The market reacted and told me, hey, I can't build industrial here because of the cost to build or the leasing or the sales expectation. But for residential, there's a much greater apt to get there. And so even if you change it, you're just going to react to the market conditions, react to whatever the flavor is. And that's fine with me. That's just a healthy way to approach your zoning. And Constitution Ave, Heritage Ave, particularly now with the Banfield Road development done, doesn't seem as crazy.
So you had asked 000 Lafayette.
Yeah.
That and the lot above it are actually side by side at the corner of Hoover. That's where, that's the building's been torn down and they're already building.
But we're doing an 8-unit.
Yeah, they're building an 8-unit there already.
So that even further is that kind of corridor is now stepping up in density.
Yeah.
But it doesn't.
It's those two lots. It's the last MRB in that area, but I got a lot of pushback from the land use, actually it was the land use committee about not changing that. So we put it on the yellow list.
But
And they got a variance to build the 8 units. that are-
Yeah.
the other question is, do we need 27 zoning districts?
No.
Do we need MRB? Do
The
we
whole
need,
part of, right, you need to slim it down. Think about how much smaller our zoning book
Yeah.
would be if we got rid of some of these.
Like, if you look at it, that the parcels in question, almost all of them are street frontage. And so you're not talking about something that absorbs like all of Ellen Park or all of
Right.
Maple Haven neighborhood, right? So
I'm talking about all the purple. All that purple is mostly industrial.
yeah,
And some of these are like 8.5 acres.
Yeah, there's some
7.5
big,
acres.
there's some big lots out there.
That, that's, you could liberate a lot of.
Very colorful, man. It's
But, getting
less
back,
color.
give back what Andrew said, I'm one of those people that said, are they building places behind McKinnon's?
Yeah.
But bottom line is, and, Mary has said this before, and the fact is that if that's where somebody wants to live and they can live there, God bless them, it's.
It's convenient. You got a grocery
Yes,
store,
grocery,
you've got,
hair salon.
places to eat.
You can work at Water Country,
It's just very convenient and it's got great access to I-95 to
Oh, yeah.
commuting. It's a great place to
You walk
live.
to the community campus.
Right.
Yeah.
if
After the.
put it this way,
Right.
and I can say this with pretty good confidence, if we had this zoning in place 7 years ago, the post office on Heritage Ave would no longer be a post office. It would be a development site. And they were fully considering selling that building until downtown closed, and that was up for sale. Like, that would have been housing, no question in my mind. So
Yep.
that's a pretty interesting use case of how I think
Our
that's
zoning
why-
is
that's why
different.
the 8.5 acres, how that would have been manipulated.
But I don't know if we'd be having this conversation if we didn't have fees. It's nice that we have some industrial areas, but.
Yes.
Because you can't have housing, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Although, can I bring forward a concept that I didn't bring forward before? Now that we have co-living, I think we need to talk about Ps.
Yes.
All that office space and whether or not co-living should be allowed there.
Brilliant.
Because
They allow hotel, so why not, now that co-living's a thing, just saying, as part of the master plan, I think we need to
I
have
feel like
that
isn't the
conversation.
hotel residence in?
It is, so. You are right, there's a residence inn.
The long-term stay.
People stay there for months, why can't they?
Right. Is it residential or is it commercial?
Right.
the only The only underlying stipulation, not to be like that guy, but you just don't own anything in peace. You're signing a
Correct.
99-year lease, which for developers, a lot less attractive than owning something on Heritage Ave or an industrial building in that area.
Yes, but having built a headquarters on Pete's for Seacoast Meeting Group, you can borrow against
Yes,
that lease.
it is financeable. I fully understand that, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a title insurable
Yeah,
property. It's just you don't own the underlying land.
anyhow,
So that one sounds like a
So
go.
it was to,
Look at, yeah,
All non-mixed, just business strictly kind of uses and trying to get some mixed use.
there was one on Route 16 next to the fish supply store.
Yep.
Is that on here?
We changed all of that the last time around, at least all the stuff that faces Route 16. It has to be actually on Route 16. There's a whole strip that was changed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So maybe we do 2 bites of the apple.
I did it over.
Yeah, right there. That all got changed the last time.
Okay.
It's a split. So some of those lots are split with G1. It was split before.
Yeah,
Now it's split instead of business and that, it's G1 and that.
okay, no further questions.
G1 and SBR, yeah, that lot.
I was thinking A and B. A, we recommend this list be considered for mixed use, and B, we recommend they look at all other office industrial.
Business only uses.
Sounds good. Got concur on that? You got
Oh, yeah.
comfortable?
would this be a place where we look at reducing the number of districts, or is that not?
Well, that's kind of the point.
That's
because-
all of it, that's all encompassing.
Because we're getting rid of the business, we used to have general business, office research, all these, and we're totally trying to get rid of those and put them into existing mixed use.
Mixed
districts.
So then the colors will less, okay.
Right, right. Okay. And if we get GRC down to GR, just 2 GR, whatever. I'd be one less color. That's right.
The color
looking
list
for one
is
less
daunting.
The color list is daunting.
Okay, where are we going? Gateway incentives.
so that's, right now, I mean, the HOP 2 grant, RKG is looking at the gateway zoning language. We're hoping to plan a public input meeting soon. We need to get back in touch with them. to
Yeah, we
see
want to try and do it really soon.
That we would invite the housing committee to that meeting, but
And the purpose of this discussion came around the Christmas tree shops lot. And the reason being is that they're building that and they're not even taking advantage of by right how many units they can put there. So therefore, our unit allowance must be too high if they're not then even getting to wanting to take an incentive to give us workforce housing. So I think that's the real analysis is to be like, if we lower how many units you can have by right so that they want to take the incentive versus giving them somebody by right, they don't even have a need. They feel perfectly fine being under the by right amount.
That was an economic choice.
But if we changed our zoning, they might be, no?
It was construction style alone. They would have had to build another floor, which would be podium style construction with steel and rather than wood.
So it was in the sweet spot where they had to put steel in.
And I pretty confident of that one.
I wanted more units. I asked them to, they said no.
Would you raise your hand? This is an honest question. Would you raise your hand as a developer and say, oh, I'm not gonna do by right, I'm gonna go ask for a variance in the city of Portsmouth right now?
No,
Exactly.
no.
So that combined with.
I don't want anyone to have to ask for a variance. I want our zoning to match what everything we
But it would be
want.
variance. It's like, it would be conditional.
Conditional use permit.
Sure, which they had to get anyway.
Right, they had to get it
It
anyway.
could have increased the density.
But
Yes.
without the density question, it's like, can we make the economics work of this and the construction style work of this and not have to ask for a greater conditional use, right? And I was involved with that, so I personally discussed it with them for a long time, and that was absolutely their consideration. It's like
They wanted easy.
checks and balances, yeah.
I think a lot of the focus of this is now that we have all this gateway zoning. How do we make the incentives work,
Mhm.
in cases they're not.
Yeah, I think it's great that we have enough data points or enough development points through various details and projects to arrive at that question even. And now then reflect on the question, like, oh, this is what happened at that job beyond. Um, where and we're not here to scrutinize, we're here to like really genuinely try to make your lives and our lives a little bit easier and more fruitful. I know it's a little bit optimistic, but that could be the way how that shapes out.
Right, I mean, if we had X-ray vision and could see their pro formas, we want to end up where they say, oh, I got a pro forma just meeting the gateway zoning requirements, and I've got another pro forma where I take advantage of the incentives.
Mhm.
And I make more money taking advantage of the incentives of putting in 10 workforce housing.
So what do you need from us?
I mean, nothing on the incentives right now. We're gonna wait to hear back from RKG and we're gonna let the housing committee know when we schedule a public meeting, because they're gonna come up and present some of their findings and.
And they should give us a roadmap.
I would think so.
I
I
mean,
mean, that's what they do.
The difference from an RKG report and a consultant telling us and people in this room telling us would be, we tend to know what the city of Portsmouth values or needs. And when you're talking about incentives, it's effectively a negotiation. And what do we want to negotiate for? What do we want to like really plant the flag into and say, hey, if you want to do this, we really want this as a receipt. And it kind of happened a few years ago when we added a few more community spaces, or we added
Yes.
like wider sidewalks. Yeah, I think we changed the percentage.
And
We added a couple different variations of it. When you take yourself out of the downtown zone and you're asking for incentives, and it's not then wider sidewalks, it's, well, maybe it's connectivity to the public bus, maybe it's EV parking, maybe it's like some of these more holistic approaches that are not necessarily generated by that development specifically, but is a residual impact that says, hey, like, good for Portsmouth because they really fought for that by getting an incentive that allowed them to do it. And so making a more general statement and more prescriptive, in my opinion, is how you get there. And developers who are coming from other areas and say, oh, I understand why they're asking for that, because our development may impact other parts of their city. Dover's pretty good at it from my knowledge. And then you go and look at like Newmarket is pretty decent. Somersworth, I think, just did some where they got like a beautiful park from a city-owned parcel that they sold off. And so again, like that push and pull, that negotiation between incentives is not always 1 + 1 = 2. It's where else do we need this value?
All right.
Let's,
see that in color. Yeah.
Focus group?
Yes, shall we move on?
we only got
Everybody
15 minutes.
Yeah.
Keeping you on target.
We're gonna keep you on target.
Mush. Okay. Focus groups, this was an idea that I dropped into things. Because back in 2017 with Portsmouth Listens, we did a housing study circle. And Jim Lucas said, well, who's gonna build the housing? It's gonna be the property owners and the, the Chinbergs and the Green and companies. You gotta hear directly from the horse's mouth what they need to build housing for middle income people as opposed to high. And so the idea was that not necessarily in public session, just get a couple of focus groups, as the land use committee did for
ADUs.
ADUs.
We actually did focus groups of some engineers, some architects, some residents that had actually applied for ADUs. And, you know, some got them, some didn't. And then just a general group. We did several different groups. We just did it with one person sort of facilitating and did it on Zoom.
Yeah, good.
And they were very helpful to then have that information to bring back to the committee.
And in 2017, what we learned was form-based zoning and mixed use for the West End was going to be really successful. And that was pretty radical in its day. So I think you could learn a lot.
Good.
Schedule. And make it groups of 2, 3, 4 people. Not public necessarily. It's awkward for developers.
Yeah, it needs to
But I
be.
think financial.
You were looking for input from the committee on what questions to
We could ask them.
right?
Yes, I missed that. Thank you.
I was just thinking the same thing that you said.
Tina, my mouth is running faster than my brain. Sorry.
We were hoping this group could help formulate what questions and sort of steer that conversation, because you do want to have preset questions so that you get answers based off of the information you're looking
I
for.
think, I mean, the basic question, really is what, I'll use your term, performer, do you need to incentivize you to basically help us in reaching our goal? That's really what we're talking about. And if maybe a situation, as Andrew's been suggesting, that, you have incentives, et cetera, that, because at the end of the day, they're looking at their profitability and how do we help you make more money and help us reach our goal? I mean, is that kind of what we're
I
looking
don't know if I want them to make more money, but
Yeah.
they should at least make money.
Make money.
I mean,
I mean, the bottom line is if you're gonna have to jump through a couple of hoops, you wanna make it worth your while.
yeah, yes. The thesis behind that is you're a for-profit developer coming to do work in Portsmouth. You want to make as much money as humanly
Of
possible.
course you can.
It's just the nature of it. That's why you do it. That's why you go through the red tape.
Right.
Asking a developer, you just named a couple of them. Sure, that would be a good start. They are going to have some discomfort with the thought of like, hey, we need to build affordable units in our non-affordable market rate projects. Historically, if they have not had to do that, they may not be the best preconditioned ones to speak on. So maybe, for example, the people doing Bed Bath & Beyond have done affordable units in Boston and Somerville and that area. So taking somebody like that who may have had a previous track record or dialogue about it, Green and Company, historically, this is like a fact, matter of fact is they haven't had to do it. So
Right.
saying to them, hey, how can we get you to build affordable? They'd be like, we're just gonna do everything right below that threshold and we're still gonna make money.
That's right.
So
Right.
that,
And that's a useful answer.
yeah, it is. And I'm a huge advocate for bringing these developers into a very informal dialogue session. Like you said, it shouldn't be public. It should be like a very casual conversation where maybe there's I don't know, like planning department liaison who can structure these conversations so that you get some really constructive answers. And
If you're on the other side of the table,
Yeah.
should we ask?
well, for example, it's like the construction style is, if we have this ability, would you do it? No, we wouldn't do it because we would have to then go to podium style construction. Okay, what would your alternative be if you were doing podium style construction, which is steel and much greater intensity? Could you really pull it off? Is it still feasible? Yes, and here's how we would arrive there. So if you can say to them, or they can say to you, we want to do 100 units. City zoning says they can do 50. Okay, if you want to do 100 units, let's have a dialogue first before we get to the Seacoast Online headline, right? Before we start getting public scrutiny, so that maybe there's a better outcome, and we're not going to guarantee you approvals, but we're still going to push your ball further down the field before you have to come in front of the public boards and get a no. I do think genuinely that dialogue up front with the planning department or the powers that be would 99% of the time produce a better outcome. So maybe an outlet for that type of conversation, and not answering your question, unfortunately, but
No, you actually are.
I think so, you are.
It's around the questions that we had when we came up with this idea, like how do we structure it? And you're just reinforcing the conversation we had of small groups privately with a couple facilitators, maybe one staff, one counselor, just having this conversation to gather that information that we need in
And,
order to put us
you know,
forward.
like, ultimately, we've been using Green and Company, so I'll continue with that example. If Green and Company comes in and says they, what?
That was a joke.
If developer one comes in and says, I want to do 100 units, and they don't get to a comfortable answer through these informal conversations outside of a proposal, okay, like, they'll move on. There's another project for them to do. Developer two might come in and say, I want to do 70 units and be far more amenable to the dialogue because their mindset coming into the meeting is much different. Again, this development site that I was just working on had 4 different outlays of approach by what they wanted to do on the site. And I said to them very upfront, I was like, this one, developer number 3, this is too much of a reach. This does not breed confidence in me to go to the seller and say, here you go. It would be just too drastic. So I then scaled back my expectations for dollars and cents by nature of what this certain developer was proposing. That conversation can happen with you all at a city level informally, and then inform the developer how to best approach it from the proposal side.
Yeah, but I think that's very nuts and bolts,
Yes.
and it's enlightening. I think what we want to get out of this is what should we do with our zoning?
What barriers are preventing you from,
Yeah.
Yeah.
what building workforce?
not
What-
one step back from the
Yeah.
project perspective,
Right.
but more just the zoning.
Right. In other words, have we got a barrier to that 100 unit?
Yeah.
Platform building. Right. And where is it? In the G node. Those can be 6 stories.
You have 5 minutes to finish your agenda.
So I would say the best question to ask would be,
You guys are tough.
because
Close.
anytime somebody does development enforcement, their first consideration is how long will it take me to get from proposal to approval?
Yeah.
Time is money in that scenario.
And with seniors, is what, 2 years?
So I have to go through.
Yeah, so if that's you make a good point. So if you want to back out of the project level question, go to the broader point of time and say, how long would you generally expect this project to take to get approved? How long historically have you had to wait for a project of this caliber and capacity to get approved? And you will learn where our inefficiencies are in a city by that question.
Yeah, I mean, Jen Stebbins said,
Third-party inspections is a great example. Dover allows third-party inspections. We do not. I don't know why or what the reason is, but third-party inspections would streamline everything on the job site into the city hall, not city hall to the job site.
What do you mean we don't allow third-party inspection?
Electrical and plumbing inspections.
Oh, it's
Building.
Inspection,
Building inspections, sorry.
building
Sorry.
inspections by people that don't work for the city, right? They're third parties that
Yep.
report back to the city.
That is a recurring statement from a lot of contractors that we work with.
other questions that we should ask?
Other questions in the category of other, or Just other questions under this.
We put the other to say, is there anything else that came to mind in this conversation that should be on the list?
I don't know how it fits into this conversation because it's been focused on zoning, but I just do want to bring it up again because I have brought it up in the past. I think the city is doing an outstanding job of trying to meet the goals of what's to be accomplished. But, if you calculate what the city does for the outlying communities of Portsmouth, it's time that they step up. I mean, we provide water, we provide sewer, we provide fire, we provide education, we provide recreational. You had a discussion at the last council meeting on recreation. They provide senior centers for outlying communities. I know you've approached them in the past. And I don't know if you even got responses, but the responses were, no, we don't want to participate. We want things just the way we want in our towns, and that's the way it's gonna be. And regardless, let Portsmouth do what they want, and we'll somehow have a benefit out of it. And I don't know how, I don't think it's within the realm of the discussion of this committee, maybe it is, or it's in the realm of the city council to try and reapproach or have the discussions with these outlying communities who have land. They might even have a financial, consideration in the housing trust or something along that. But I think it's time to, we're doing the best we can with what we have.
I don't disagree with you. We've had that conversation. The mayor wrote letters to all of our adjacent communities and got very little response, in my opinion, which was sad. I do know, considering I do chair the Rockingham Planning Commission and I sit in meetings with representatives from all of our neighboring communities on a fairly regular basis. Granted, housing isn't the only thing that we talk about. We talk about many different things, but it's hard. Like I say before, people, Rye has actually tried. They've actually had a lot of development. Newington doesn't try at all. Newcastle has no land. Greenland, they're all worried about not putting up more housing until they can get us to expand that bridge on Route 33, that they are going to, come hell or high water, they're gonna get that done before they ever allow anything more. So every community has sort of a different reasoning. I can tell you the outlying communities, if we go even outside the seacoast to more like Raymond's and whatnot, there's a lot of towns that are just flat out small towns and they want to keep it the way it is and they won't change.
And if that's the decision, so be it. But I mean, if they're gonna benefit out of our efforts, then they ought to make some type of contribution.
I don't disagree with you.
But, and I don't know how this, it's beyond this
We all love
committee to
local
make that,
control.
but I mean, it's within the realm of the city council to just be consistent in that request.
I think we are in a way that of what we support on a
just here,
state
but-
level, like what we support or don't support on a state level. I think that's really the most that we can do because at this point, we can't control another community, but we can support the state for like the state trying to allow multifamily housing everywhere, right? We can support that, which would then force some of these communities to allow more density.
I mean, our stake in the game is that we offer so many services to these outlying communities. Is there gonna be a consequence if they don't? I don't know, consequence, but I mean, some type of,
Go all MAGA.
if.
Eric, I have an answer for you. We could put tolls into the toll.
Oh, a fee. It's a fee.
But I think it's hard to pay the toll if you're a non-resident.
If you're a non-resident, you come into the city, you just pay more for parking.
Yeah.
That's all we have
It's
to do is
just
pay,
a price.
charge more for
You
parking.
have to pay to watch the
It's just-
fireworks.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be considered as human solutions. I think it's a serious thing.
Yeah.
No, you're
It
absolutely right.
Increasing, parking.
Increasing the parking would do.
Before we, Mayor,
I don't know how to say it, but we talked before when RKG about 10% or 15% set aside for affordable housing units. Is there a question around the difference between 10 and 15%? What that would feel like for the developer and why to see, because I remember very much looking at that report and seeing that in some cases, we're almost at the place there was like that tipping point between 10 and 15, and we're almost at 15, I think, in a few instances. I don't remember exactly.
Let's ask that.
But I'd like to ask something around the 10 and 15.
I think it goes, we were getting none. 15% we were getting 0. At 10% we were getting some.
We've got one more item on the agenda.
Yes.
We got a letter
Oh, yeah.
purporting to show how many units that the unit, number of housing units that we're gonna see in the future is much higher than the planning department figures.
Right, and I just checked what they had provided and, their numbers were wrong on like 11 of the developments. And so, we provided this table showing how we track. We have a master development sheet that we track in-house. And so the numbers that were provided, based on these developments, it's more like 1,970. Just correcting some of the ones that were not. And some of these haven't gone through the approval process. Where our chart here talks about
Depends on where they
It
are,
has. to
where
be
they
that
are in the
application.
process.
or just where they are in the process.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's, bottom line is that it's a pipeline. And someone deciding what is in the pipeline and what's.
And at what time and
And
at
what
what stage, you know, it's a moving.
Moving target,
But
because there could be things that never get filled.
can I make one comment on that? We get a lot of information from a lot of different people. And most of it is very good and helps us through our process. And I appreciate that. In this particular note here, I think we all know the history. And I think that it's inappropriate to try to take a swipe at our hardworking city employees. The tone of the message was not informational. The tone of the message was more confrontational. And I don't think there's any place for that. And first of all, I want to thank the Peters for the work that they do and let you know that I recognize that sometimes you take shots that are not necessary. So thank you. Thank you.
And anything else? Thank you for all.
Well,
Let's adjourn.
We've been productive tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.